to the On the Air podcast, a companion to On the Air magazine, a bi-monthly magazine from ARRL for beginner to intermediate ham radio licensees. I'm your host and the editor of On the Air, Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY. Every month, the On the Air podcast extends material found in On the Air magazine to help you learn about the many things the ham radio hobby and service has to offer. The On the Air podcast is sponsored by ICOM for the love of ham radio. Welcome to the March 2025 episode. The March-April 2025 issue of On the Air features an article called A VHF UHF Antenna Menagerie that details the variety of antennas that a ham can use at the VHF and UHF frequencies, from simple whips to ground planes and J-poles, all the way up to directional beam antennas. This month, I'm joined by ARRL Radio Sport and Regulatory Information Manager Bart Yankee, W9JJ, and ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Bork, N1SFE, who are here to walk us through this VHF UHF menagerie of the various types of antennas and their use cases. Welcome, Bart. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks for having us on.
So let's start out with handheld radios, because a lot of new hams, that is their first radio. Handhelds, as a lot of us know, come with an antenna, a very simple antenna that's familiarly known as a rubber duck. And what can folks expect out of a rubber duck, and when might somebody want to attach their handheld to an antenna that is a little better and has a farther reach?
Well, rubber ducks do have a limited range, and you need to remember that VHF and UHF frequencies are very much line of sight. So you need to, if you have any sort of obstructions in the way, like buildings or even terrain, rubber duck antenna will have a limited range. And a lot of times people use rubber ducks on their handhelds when they're getting into a repeater system, and the repeaters in that case are usually doing most of the work to help transmit your signal to other people who you may be talking to.
Keep in mind also that you need to determine what your objective is. So if your objective is something that is easily accomplished through a repeater, then the rubber duck will often accomplish it for you. And if you're looking to do something, say, radio to radio simplex, where you're not in the vicinity of the person you're trying to work, the benefit of the greater antenna is a goal that you need to keep in mind.
So, so in those cases, what are the options that a ham might have for going beyond the rubber duck?
Well, there are other options. I had my very first radio was a handheld, and it came with a very limited, very short rubber duck on it. I bought what was at that time marketed as what was called a tough duck. It was a bit longer. It did extend the range a bit, and it also was very flexible, so that way it didn't get caught up in, you had it clipped on your belt, it wouldn't get broken or anything. That made a bit of a difference. But again, you'll have to look online to see. There's a couple things you need to consider: is what type of antenna connector your radio has. At the time when I had bought my handheld, everything was all BNC connectors, but they've changed to a different style of connector. So you need to make sure what style of connector and what frequencies you want to transmit on. There are dual band versions of duck antennas or single band. So it depends on what you're using it for.
The article, I don't know if you've read the article in the issue, but it gets into omnidirectional antennas and directional antennas. There are a lot of omnidirectional antennas that a ham can choose from at VHF, UHF frequencies. Can you talk a little bit about omnidirectional versus directional, and for folks who may be new and aren't familiar with those terms, what are folks getting when they're getting an omnidirectional antenna?
I think Paul's going to demonstrate a few examples of those through illustrations as part of the video component of this. To begin, omnidirectional means that the amount of signal being radiated is equal in all directions. And whether it's a rubber duck antenna or it's a radio, say it's a handheld that's connected to a mobile antenna, oftentimes the mobile antenna is omnidirectional. If it's connected to the J pole, which we'll talk about in a little bit, antenna, again, these are external based antennas. These are antennas that require a separate umbilical feed line that connect to the appropriate connector for your radio. And then eventually you can get up to omnidirectional antennas that are used not only in a vertical orientation, which would often be the case for mobile and for if you were portable walking, things like that, but also if you decide to get into horizontally polarized activities.
And so polarization is the direction in which the signal is radiating.
So it'll be the orientation of the signal radiation. So you've got omnidirectional as 360 degrees in all direction, if you will, and then you've got a vertical plane radiation or a horizontal plane radiation. And depending on the type of activity you're using, like say a mobile FM or D Star or things like that, or handheld, you're going to be in a vertical orientation. These are all great for local communications or through repeaters. Um, those who have used them over time or used them in base station orientations, if you will, have also learned that a vertically oriented antenna may pick up noise that a horizontally oriented antenna may not.
Okay. And if folks aren't clear on polarization, vertical and horizontal polarization, the next issue of On the Air magazine is going to have a feature article that digs into polarization a little more, and it's going to help clear up that concept for folks. So there are different types of omnidirectional antennas: J poles, quarter wavelength ground planes, loops. What factors do hams need to consider when choosing from among these antennas?
I think one of the most important things is to realize what you're going to do with it and where you're going to mount it. So different antennas have different mounting constraints, and with VHF, UHF, if you're using something that's permanently mounted, your best bet is to go as high as possible. Height is very helps get your signal out much better. And again, you also have to realize what terrain surrounds you. So it's I think it is important to realize what you're going to do with the antenna, and then what constraints do you have? Are you limited by where you can mount it on your house? Are you an apartment dweller, etc.? So that's something you need to consider.
We have some examples that we'll be showing again. And one of those examples is the W1AW 50.80 megahertz beacon or bulletin antennas. These are square, horizontally polarized, if you will. We refer to them as squalo antennas. And again, height to a certain extent, if you're on the side of a tower, there's some shading to the opposite side of the tower. So again, you'll have examples of how those different antennas are used and what you want to accomplish with them.
So at VHF, UHF, there are also directional antennas, like Yagi beam antennas. So as opposed to an omnidirectional antenna that radiates the same in all directions, a directional antenna you can concentrate the RF in a particular direction. So that's clearly an advantage. What kinds of situations might a ham working VHF, UHF be in that they might want a directional antenna?
If you happen to be located further away from the location where you're trying to communicate, sometimes a directional antenna can help. It can definitely help increase your range in that one specific direction, like if you're trying to hit a distant repeater as opposed to the local one. Or in my case, I switched to directional antennas when I got into contesting, because in that point, you're trying to contact a specific station. And at the same time, while those antennas are good at focusing your energy in one direction, they're also good at rejecting unwanted signals from other directions. So if you're trying to, what they call, null out a unwanted transmission from somebody else who happens to be located adjacent on your frequency that interfering with you, you can actually kind of direct the antenna to favor the direction of the station you're trying to receive.
Energy is concentrated based on the design of the antenna, the number of elements on the antenna, the length of the boom. Boom length, more than anything, is a factor of gain. Again, it's all about concentrating the energy, reducing the nulls, I should say the side lobes of the antenna, and increasing the number of nulls, but also keeping in mind that as you look at what type of directional antenna you want, you have to decide what your particular location parameters permit. So if you need to rotate it, do you have a place where you can put it on a rotor? If you need it fixed to the side of a tower, do you have the location or the space to actually mount it? And of course, if you put it on top of a vehicle, sometimes a very important factor is, can you get it high enough above the vehicle so the vehicle doesn't interact with the signal if you're in the same directional plane as the vehicle itself?
So given that there are so many different types of antennas to choose from for these use cases, we do have some examples that Bart and Paul brought along. And we can take a closer look at these various types of antennas, and including their sizes, which is often a consideration in terms of choosing, because you know what kind of space you have to work with for your antenna.
And one thing to consider too is the frequencies that you want to transmit on. Now, if you recall from taking your technician license, frequency and wavelength are inversely proportional. So in other words, the higher the frequency, the shorter the wavelength. So that means that for a higher frequency antenna, your antenna is going to be a bit smaller than a lower frequency. Like in the case of a 6 meter versus a 2 meter Yagi, the 6 meter Yagi is roughly 3 times the size of a 2 meter Yagi, because 6 meters is, so if you were to compare two of the similar Yagis next to each other, like a 3-element 6 meter Yagi versus 3-element 2 meter Yagi, you'll notice that the 2 meter Yagi is substantially smaller. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things to consider is the space you have available for any given antenna. And so, a 6 meter antenna mounted on your roof is going to be significantly larger than the 2 meter, or even a 70 centimeter antenna, which would be even smaller than a 2 meter antenna.
Something that VHF rovers have to keep in mind is that the reflective element, even the driven element on a 6 meter antenna, approaches 9 feet in length. And when your vehicle is 6 feet wide, that 1.5 feet on both sides might be chagrined when driving through narrow areas or passing vehicles or what have you. So people who are often driving with 6 meter antennas might be using a vertical antenna. Sometimes the 5/8 wave 2 meter mobile antenna serves as a quarter wave 6 meter antenna in its dual purpose. And many VHFers do that. And then they have other designs of loop and halo and cloverleaf style 6 meter antennas to accommodate a different formation of the antenna to still get the wavelength you want, but in a shape that is more conducive to being able to use it mobile.
Bart, earlier you mentioned dipoles. A lot of times dipoles are a very simple antenna for folks to put up, and people are certainly using dipoles at these frequencies.
They are. Dipole is convenient to make. Again, 468 divided by the frequency gives you the length of that antenna. Feed it in the middle. Don't worry about the match. Feed it with 50 ohm. Feed it with 50 ohm coax, and it can serve as your external antenna to a handheld or mobile or base station transceiver. If you carry the concept forward to beam antennas, often the driven element of a beam antenna is some basis of that dipole modified to fit the design of the antenna. You'll even hear of folded dipoles as the driven element as a part of a beam antenna.
The very first antenna I made when I was a tech was a simple 2-meter dipole, and it worked. It worked okay. I mean, it wasn't fantastic, but it got me on the air, and it was a very simple antenna. I had some scrap wire. I ended up making a 2-meter dipole, and it worked. And I actually made plenty of contacts on that.
One of the other antenna designs, and we'll have an illustration of it, is something called a log periodic. It looks like a TV antenna. The basis for TV antennas in general are a broad bandwidth, beginning with high frequencies, the highest frequencies, at the front or the direction of signal reception you want, with the smallest elements all the way to the rear of the antenna with the largest elements for the lower frequencies, if you will, in the days gone by. Channels 30, 40, 50, whatever they might be, will be your shortest elements. And channels, if for the ones that are still active, of 5, 4, 3, 2, etc., will be the longest elements. The log periodics that are available for amateur radio look exactly like that, and serve a similar purpose. Directional. They have a front to back performance where the back nulls signals coming in from behind you. And the nice thing about antennas like log periodics is they cover multiple bands with a single feed line, relatively moderate power acceptance, and they can be lightweight and they can be short.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thanks again to Bart W9JJ and Paul N1SFE for joining us. We will be back again in April, but in the meantime, feel free to send comments about On the Air to ota@arrl.org, and you can learn more about ARRL membership at arrl.org. Until next time, I'm Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY 73.